there. All that blue. That is the rain. How you going today? It's so good to see you. Today I want to share two exciting new products for the photography industry. One is the MEGADAP ETZ adapter 21 Pro. And what this does is it allows you to put Sony lenses, a really interesting and exciting Sony E-mount lens. With this adapter, we're going to be able to mount it on the Z50, the Z30, the ZFC, the Z5, the Z6, the Z6 II, Z7, Z7 II, Z8, Z9, and ZF. And this is the latest version. It is $249 US. That's a car just driving into the car park. Just if you're wondering where the dynamic lighting is coming from, that's because I really am outside. There really is a massive bridge behind me there. And you might be seeing these raindrops. I just hope this. Let me look at the radar before I go any further. All that blue. Oh, I got a massive shower about to land on my head. And this is the edge, but that's unfortunate because we just started shooting. Because we're about to get absolutely pounded. See ya. Maybe I can't sit at my desk and do an unboxing, but because it's summer rain, it's warm. All right, let's go. Yeah. Love it. Love the rain. Love what it does to the light. Well, here we are. Yes, I'm out of the rain. I'm in a different location and it's actually 2 days later. This is sometimes what happens with these shoots. Sony E-mount Tamron created 17mm to 50mm f4. Let's take a quick look at this lens. Now, of course, it would go without saying that you'd stick a lens like this on a camera like this, and this is my Sony a7R III. Makes perfect sense. These are a great fit. They're going to work super well. If we want to test out how well the E to Z adapter works, let alone how well it works with this Tamron Sony lens, then I think one of the cameras with the fast XP7 focus system. Let's first take a look at this Tamron lens. And as I said, we're just going to be very quick about it. Very small lens hood. Yeah, that's really compact. Now it's interesting, I don't own the 14 to 30 f4 in the Z mount, but it is a little bit wider. But of course it is a little bit wider. It's 14 to 30, this is 17 to 50. And that might be what makes all the difference. It's very light, very light. This is certainly under 500 grams. And something I love about this is filter size, 67mm, and zooming, everything is internal. And what we can see there is that element going from 50mm to 17. It has always intrigued me how this position is 17 and this same position seemingly is 50. But I think there's probably some things going on the inside that we can't see. And when it comes to external controls, we have zoom, we have focus, and we have one function button here. That's it. And we have the USB-C port. Now, something that would be great to see Tamron do in the future, which is something that I've seen other lens manufacturers do, and that is to actually stick the USB port here on the mount. Now, the advantage of that is it's hidden from the exterior. Now, of course, the USB-C is on the bottom, so that's the most logical place for it to be, but it's not weather sealed. I don't know how critical it would be or not if something got in there. Maybe circuitry-wise, it is protected from a short, and it's only an issue when the port is being used. Now, the level of weather sealing, there is a rubber gasket here, so there is a degree of weather sealing. Really not much more to talk about when it comes to this lens other than how does it perform. And what we're doing here is testing out the F to Z adapter with the Tamron. How did face detect go? I reckon it'll be all right. So first, why not? Let's drop down an octave. That might sound a little bit more professional, mightn't it? Let's pop it on the Sony a7R III. Beautiful. Nice, snug fit. That's got a good feel about it. Just heading out for a little bit of a night shoot with the 17 to 50 f4. We're going to try and get some shots to show how it all works. The cameras that we are using for this test are the Z50, the Z6 II, the Z8, and the Sony A7R3. This is a super wide range of cameras from 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2023. What's interesting is how consistent the photography industry is, and you'll see these images do not change that much considering the broad range of technology here. They're all BSI, one is APS-C, one is stacked and shutterless. Let's start with that stacked and shutterless BSI sensor, which is 45 megapixels, and we can see the E17 to 50 f4 shooting ISO 64 at 1/5 of a second handheld f4 at a full 17mm. And if we go into 100%, the Z8, the stabilization, because the lens has no stabilization within it, kind of makes sense as more and more cameras are becoming stabilized. Certainly makes it cheaper and lighter. And if you're thinking of putting this on a Sony full-frame camera, well, they also are all stabilized. If you're talking the alpha range, center of the frame, these look sharp, they look rendered well. There's only the smallest signs, maybe the smallest signs of purple fringing going on up there, but we are zoomed in to 400%. I think that's a good result. It's well rendered. Here's a look at the adjustments I've made. I love to show you this because this is the power of a raw file. Those are the three adjustments: shadows, highlights, exposure. I haven't touched white balance. We could, depends on your taste, get a little cooler. And that there is actually probably a little bit closer to reality. It's very difficult for any camera to know what's going on. And you'll see across all of these images, they all make the same decision when it comes to color temperature. There's the Z8. We'll go back to looking at the metadata because that's what's, I think, probably of most interest to everyone because the adjustments I did across these images are the same. Z8 again, looking great. Handheld, of course. How sharp it is, how well stabilized it is at 100%, and how nicely all of that's being rendered. Now, it might be slightly soft. There might be the slightest bit of camera shake there. Hard to tell. Might not as well. It's a pretty good result for 1/5 of a second. Now here is the Z6 II with very similar settings. We are at 100 ISO, 1/5 of a second f4, so you can see it feels a little bit brighter because it is almost twice as bright going from 64 to 100. Almost, not quite. You can see the difference in resolution, which is really interesting. That's 100% on the Z6 II, whereas the Z8 was probably about that close. We're now at 200%. That's what you get when you pay extra. It's good, if you want it, if you need to do that sort of thing. This Sony E-mount lens using the E to Z adapter, we are getting full autofocus, full aperture control, and we're getting in-body image stabilization. All of it's working, all of it's understanding what's going on. And this is the result. Looks good. Put it side by side with whichever one of the Z8 one. Z8's on the top. So the Z8's 100%, and you can see the difference with the Z6. There's a really good example of the image difference of 45 megapixels versus 24 megapixels. It's pretty straightforward. And there's the brightness difference. Now the colors do change on the star. So really, if you're looking at brightness, look at the building in the background here. And that is the difference between 64, as we can see here, and 100 ISO, as we can see there. Loving that result. The Z50 is an APS-C camera. So 17 becomes 25.5 mil field of view equivalent. And that's why the frame looks different to the Z8. We can see that that's 17 mil, but that's the crop factor. And what you're seeing here is there is no in-body image stabilization on a Z50. And there is no stabilization on this lens. So at 1/5 of a second, I was struggling to do this handheld with no vibration support. Based on this result, that's somewhere around a 1/10 of a second, maybe a 1/15. And I always say I can probably get away with a shutter speed that matches my focal length, especially when I'm this wide. So somewhere between a 15th and a 20th. I think it would be fine. And what that means is you need to go up to 400 ISO, which would be fine. You can use this lens in a bright city at night, get away with it on a camera like the Z50, as long as you've got stable hands. I definitely have stable hands, and I've been doing this stuff for decades, so I've got my techniques sorted out. But that's what you can expect from a Z50 at base ISO. If you don't want to do it handheld, you can just bring a monopod or a tripod. The Z50 is so small, and the combination of this lens and that camera, absolutely fabulous. Everything's the same here. Well, ISO 100, 150 per second, f4, handheld. For some reason, 19mm. I'm not sure why it's saying 19mm. I thought I made it wide, but these are the two closest cameras, the Sony versus the Z8, and we're at around the 50% mark. Obviously, the Z8 is 45, the Sony is 42, but for some reason I zoomed in 2mm, so they look almost exactly the same size, and the image quality is great on both of them. Definitely looking really good on the Z8, and what I'm trying to show in this video is not which camera is better. What I'm trying to say is there's no question that this Tamron 17-50 E-mount lens is great. There's no question of that, and there's no question that the MEGADAP ETZ Adapter 21 Pro is doing a great job of allowing this lens to work accurately, sharply, fully automatically, and we're getting everything that you get with the Sony. That's all I'm trying to say here, and that's all I'm trying to show here. That's the main image comparison. From then on, I just went on to shoot this lens further on the Z8 and the Z6. Alrighty, well here we are shooting some video of the beautiful Angel. Now we'll zoom in somehow. There, we're at 50mm, 125th, 3200, 125th f4. Looking good. I wanted to show you this Z8 image. This is at almost half a second. It's at 0.4 of a second, handheld, 50mm. This is really dark. This is a really, really dark scene at night time. You can see how much light I'm gathering being at 1 second. We are almost getting away with almost half a second, and I think that's phenomenal. So again, just showing how well this E-mount Tamron lens and the adapter are working. This moody night on all these beautiful colors, not exactly the frame that I wanted, but close. ISO 640, 1/6 of a second, handheld on the Z8. Beautiful. Going to 100%. Look at the color, look at the rendition. This is a great result. The adjustments are minor. And if you look on the left over here, you can see that I've done nothing to saturation with these images. Lens and color, and obviously exposing correctly for color and all these things. You get color. It's a good lens. It's rendering it well. And 50mm, 1/13 of a second. I think I find all of those things in the bottom a little bit messy, and I'd consider cropping there somewhere. Not sure about that either. Maybe there somewhere. I kind of like those umbrellas. All right. You get the idea. It's doing a good job. Z8 and Z6, both at 1/5 of a second, both at 100 ISO, both at f4. I'm obviously not standing in exactly the same spot. You can't see it in these images, but it was raining, and I only have one copy of this lens, so I had to keep lens swapping, and the Z6 II doesn't have a shutter shield, so in the rain it's quite a difficult operation to swap. But Z8 on the top at 50%, that the Z6 II and the Z8 look pretty similar. The exposure's the same. 68% on the Z6, 50% on the Z8. Let's take the Z8 into 100%, and we're now looking at pixel for pixel on the Z8, and honestly you're getting a fine result from both cameras. You really are. Clearly there's more detail on the Z8. You can see it here in this writing, you can see it here in the sign, you can see it in the lanterns and so on. That's fine, we know that. But what's really interesting to me, you've got all of these fairy lights, and I do not see purple fringing in this scenario, and we are wide open on this lens at f4. So my conclusion of this lens is thus: I think for the price point,
$699 US dollars, 1,200 odd Australian dollars, somewhere around there. Depends who you buy it from. How small, how light, really flexible. The 17 to 50 is great. I think this lens is delivering. It's up to you whether you really love the idea of this lens so much that you would buy it in E-mount and then get the MEGADAP adapter to make it work like we are here. Certainly doable. I do think, as it's an unusual zoom range, 17 to 50, there's a really good chance that this lens will come out for Z. And I actually think if it does, it'll be really popular because of that range.
There's a little bit of distortion I can see at the bottom of the frame there. Absolutely. The table here, which is flat, is curved a bit. Now, my camera certainly would not know about this lens. No chance. The firmware hasn't been updated in this camera, I think, in something like 3 or 4 years. So there's no way it's going to know this absolutely new Tamron. There it is there. It's a little hamburger. Pretty amazing. There it is in the flesh. Just a small piece of metal, machined, high quality metal. What's critical is something that's this thin, and it's 2 millimeters there on that edge. So whoever designed the Z mount, I'd be really interested to know whether they designed it knowing it was possible to make an adapter. I don't know if it's possible to make an adapter for the Canon mount. Also possible that maybe Canon wouldn't cope. Although, I'm not sure people would be buying RF lenses to put them on their Z mount. The only people that would be interested is people going from one mount to the other. And we love having the sensor shield. Like, that's a real cool thing to have. And especially when you're outside, it's just a little bit of peace of mind. Okay, so we're going to gently put that on there. Something it's hard to get used to is the change in the position of the lens release button. On this side, Nikon have function buttons, and of course the A9 III has just gotten its first function button on the front there. I wonder how worried they were that didn't want to put function buttons too close. Well, that's really exciting. We've got full aperture functionality. That's all working brilliantly. Let's just drop that down to 64 ISO. Everything's the same. The distortion I can see here of the table, you'll see that at the bottom of the frame there. For a lens with this relatively broad amount of reach, I think it's broad for what I would call a super wide at the wide ends. I think anything below about 24 or 20 starts to get into the super wide range. 17 to 50 is quite flexible, be really useful on your other camera. If you're, say, a wedding photographer, it gives you 50mm, which is sort of portrait, anywhere between 35-50. That's the wide end of portrait. That's really useful, plus wide for inside venues, churches, and so on. Really useful lens. Great travel lens. Obviously, we can see it's small, light, and affordable. This is the Sony E-mount for Tamron. Now, of course, in the last 12 months or so, there has been 3 Tamron lenses released for the Z mount. This would be, from my perspective, the sort of lens that we might see coming soon. I can't really see a lot of reasons why some of the more modern and unique lenses from Tamron that are, say, for Fuji mount or for the E mount might come to Z, especially if Z does not have it. Now, we do not have a 17 to 50 for Z. Very exciting for Sony users to have this sort of range at this sort of price point. I just think it's great. Now, build quality wise, look, it's an affordable lens. That there, I would say, feels like that is a composite, and that is a composite, but of course it does have a metal mount. To me, there's a really interesting trade-off. We've got people that talk to us about saying mirrorless, it's all supposed to be smaller and lighter, and that's what they want. They want smaller and lighter. But then you get people, when they get smaller and lighter, they go, oh, but this lens has too much plastic in it. Well, I feel a little bit sorry for all of the camera manufacturers. What are they to do? You want smaller and lighter, but you don't want smaller and lighter. And it's hard, and they're going to experiment. And the other thing, which I talked about something like 2 years ago, when it comes to composite materials, or what some will colloquially call plastic, Composites are used for all sorts of things, which include composites which have Kevlar within them, which the Z8 body, I believe, has Kevlar nanotubes in it. Bulletproof glass is also made out of plastics in some cases. And of course, plastics are used for all sorts of things, from firearms to getting rockets to the moon to inside all sorts of electronics. So I just want to stress that the idea of composites today is just simply not what we knew 10, 20 years ago. And there is some arguments that plastics, which give more than metal, so if they have an impact, they may well actually absorb the impact and then bounce back out again and don't actually impact the external part of a lens. In other words, you don't end up with a dint because it just basically, it gives. Like for years, you've had some bumper bars where you have low speed impacts and they will just go in and then they'll go out again. Totally fine. Why can't we do the same with lenses? And of course, if they're designed to do it, then they will also be designed to not impact the elements if they're giving a little bit. So yes, this has composites. In the case of it not being the mount, but it being the external component of the lens, part of the barrel, which really, they don't get a lot of impact, use, grinding, and so on. We just sort of rest our very soft hands on them, soft compared to many things. I think it's not a problem, and it's actually an advantage. And we have seen some pretty significant weight decreases in modern day lenses from all manufacturers, making things smaller and lighter. So I don't see it as a problem. And at the end of the day, optical performance is what it's going to be all about. Well, there you have it. Out on the Z8 and on the Z6 II, I thought I'd give it a little bit of a run. Now the Megadap adapter, which is in part of all of this mix to make this all work, you're looking at around, depending on who you buy it from, 400, just under 400 Australian dollars, including taxes. And if you're in the USA, it's about $249 US, excluding taxes. Now this is the third version of this adapter. I've had the previous two, and the only thing that you need to be mindful of is it's very thin, and the components, you do need to be a little bit more careful when using this adapter than when you're using just your standard lens. There's one particular component that I want to talk about. This is the release for the Sony side of the lens, and that is held on with a pretty thin piece of metal. Now to me, that is the weakest part of this whole creation, and it's something that you need to be most careful of. The rest of it, through version 1, 2, and now 3, these contacts here, they've cleaned them up a lot, and it's way better than it used to be. And now it works on the APS-C cameras. The version 3 is the best one so far, and I feel very confident that you're going to get great results. And of course, I've made reviews about the previous two adapters, and people have talked about using them and having great success with them. But also, yeah, you do need to be a little bit careful because there's not much to it. And with something that there's not much to it, of course, be a little bit more careful than things that are much larger, like lenses and cameras. And that really is my only comment. But if you do have some Sony e-glass and you're on the Z mount, it really opens up a lot of avenues. Alrighty, well, there it is, the two together. Very successful outcome when it comes to using this lens, this relatively new lens from Tamron, and really exciting to be able to mount this and run it to the absolute max here on the Z8 or any of the Z cameras. It does work with third-party lenses, and of course it works with, I think, all first-party Sony E-mount lenses. If there's a lens in the Sony ecosystem that you really love and you really want to use, this actually works. It's really fantastic. Now, my friend Bruce, he is interested in me trying out his 200 to 600 millimeter lens, which I'm really excited to try out, the Sony version on the Z8. So I'll be looking forward to bringing that sometime soon. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed the images from the 17 to 50 f4 from Tamron. As I said before, I do hope it comes to the Z mount sometime soon. I think it's a really useful lens, and I think it's really well priced. So that's super helpful. All right, I'd love to know your thoughts on the E to Z adapter. Will you ever be getting yourself one? It'd be super interesting to know. Do you have any E mount lenses that you might want to bring to your Z? And also, what do you think about the 17-50 f4? It's been so good to see you. If this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, bye for now. What we're doing now is I've taken the 50mm 1.8 off the Z9 that we're shooting on, and we're now shooting on the Tamron 17-50 f4, and I can only assume that face detect and everything else is working exactly the same. And of course, the only difference is it is a minimum of f4, and of course, well, for some people, f4 is just never going to be enough. But in this modern age, and as I have tested with a number of wide and super wide primes, some of them f4, some of them 5.6, obviously the wider you get, the more forgiving camera shake is. You can go to lower shutter speeds. Something to think about with video, because obviously you don't want to go below a 50th. You can get away with a 25th, but I don't necessarily advise it. So you can push your ISOs. So is f4 a big problem? It's only a big problem if you love short depth of field, which I do. But again, that's pretty hard to create, especially at this sort of distance. I'm probably 7 feet, just over 2 meters from the camera. You're not going to be able to create that if you're at 17, but you certainly can create that if you're at 50mm. And in the case of this lens, I was shooting with at 1.8. So look, that's something to think about. But that 17 to 50mm is an enormous range. It's absolutely fantastic to have that much range in such a small, light, and affordable package. It really is. So we trade these things off. For example, and this is a lens that I want to talk about, and I haven't had a chance to talk about because there's been so much going on and I've been traveling, is the new Canon 24 to 105 f2.8. Now it's a big lens. It's almost as big as a 70 to 200, but it's 2.8 and it's giving you an enormous range. Some people want 2.8. Some people want short depth of field. They want the separation and they want the low light capacity, just like we've talked about with that fantastic other Tamron lens, which I love, the 35 to 150 f2 to 2.8. That is a spectacular lens, but it's a little bit heavier and it's a little bit bigger, and it's the same with the Canon. So obviously some people are prepared to pay for lenses. That Canon lens is something like $5,000 here in Australia, which must make it around $3,000, $3,500 US. So they're prepared to pay for it and they're prepared to carry it. It's big. And it's interesting. Some people just want low light, short depth of field, etc., and everything that comes with that. And some people want compact and a lot of range, like we have here on this lens. Compact, affordable, light, but it's an f4.